All right. Wow, we have quite a few people joining the call. We're going to get started at 4:32. But I want to thank you all for joining and we know you're wrapping up your workday. Very nice. Very good. We will get started here very shortly. Hi, everybody. I am so glad we're having folks from Southern California, Northern California joining the call. We have an amazing panelist. Is it panelist or panel? We have an amazing panel for you. Hello, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining our Zoom event on diversity, equity, and inclusion, and how to hire for diversity, creating cultures of belonging. We'll get started very soon at 4:32. I feel like we should have music. I had some music. Elliot, we'll have to do that another time. We should. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining our IIDA event with both Southern and Northern California. This has been a team effort. We have an amazing panel for you today. And this is supposed to be a conversation where we're all learning from each other. We will get started in 1 minute. Thank you so much for joining the call. Welcome. You're going to get started here at 4:32. Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us. I wish we had music. Thank you for all the welcomes I'm seeing in the chat already. Very excited. Okay, it's 4:32. Let's get started. This is being recorded because it is meant to be a tool. We want to welcome both Northern and Southern California for joining the call today. We hope that you will come with a curious mind. Our goal is to bring awareness, new ideas, and move the needle on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We hope that you will walk away inspired and ready to create your own culture of belonging in your organization. And we're going to be unpacking diversity, equity, inclusion, how to hire for diversity and create a culture of belonging. Elliot, next slide. We want to thank our sponsor, Knoll. Thank you very much for sponsoring such an amazing conversation and a topic that we need to continue to address in our industry. We also would like to thank our chapter patrons. So many folks out there, thank you very much. And we're gonna pause right here. Here is our amazing panelist. So here is a little housekeeping. This will be recorded, which I mentioned earlier. This is meant to be an open conversation. Our panel, they're gonna unpack 7 dynamic questions. Once that is done, it will be your opportunity, audience, to engage with the panelists, ask your own questions, give your comments, come off screen. This is supposed to be a 2-way, let's all learn together in this experience. Put your questions in the Q&A. It's going to be live and open. I also would like to just give a really great shout out to Yoko, who was past president of IIDA, but this is all due to her. She is the person who thought it was very important for us to have a VP of DE&I. And the reason why we're having this discussion is many folks, once I took the position, asked Rashanda, how do I hire for diverse candidates? Where do I find them? And one of the things I kept thinking about was, great, you can hire amazing people, but how do you create a culture of belonging? So we have thought leaders today to unpack some of those questions. So let's get started. And let's meet our panelists. Our first up is Jenn Johnson. Please introduce yourself, share your title, and meet our audience.
Sure, thank you, Rashanda. So my name is Jenn Johnson. I am the Director of People and Culture at ezCater.
And next, we have Marco Lindsey, Associate Director. Well, actually, Marco, you're gonna go ahead and read your own title. Marco, please introduce yourself to the audience.
Thank you, Rashanda. Thank you everyone for being here. Marco Lindsey, Associate Director of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion at the UC Berkeley Haas School of Business. Focused on making sure that our business leaders of tomorrow are focused on being equitable leaders and that they're prepared and equipped to lead diverse teams and create diverse teams. I'm also working with an organization called the 100 Black Men of America. And what we do is we focused on diversity and hiring, primarily in the tech sector. And so we have several functions in that arena. Glad to be here with this wonderful panel and looking forward to chatting with you all.
Thank you, Marco. Next, we have Christina Herrmann.
Hi, Christina Herrmann. I am Chief Human Resources Officer for Gensler. I have been in this space for the past 15 years, though only at Gensler for less than a year. I've worked primarily in the legal industry, so this is my first opportunity to be in architecture and design, and loving the environment and bringing some of the experience that I've had in the law firm to this environment. One of the significant achievements that I had in the legal industry most recently was not on the other side of recruiting. It's the retention piece of it, and making sure that we were very focused on promoting diverse employees into leadership roles. So looking forward to this conversation.
Very good. Thank you, Christina. We now have Todd Palmer.
Hi, I'm Todd Palmer. As you just said, I'm the Director of Diversity and Design, which I've just completed just over 60 days in a leadership position for an initiative that was launched in June that really grew out of a collaboration of 20 organizations spearheaded by Miller Knoll, which at that time was Herrmann Miller Group, to address the national reckoning, long overdue, on race that emerged in the aftermath of George Floyd. So these 20 organizations have come together in a collaborative sense to look at how we can move this needle together. My role, I have a zigzagging path through design, trained as an architect, most recently created a network called the Chicago Architecture Biennial, which was really dedicated to making that design conversation more inclusive to all of the city of Chicago, particularly the Black and Brown geographies of it, while at the same time advancing a global conversation to innovate in architecture and design. So I'm bringing a facilitative leadership to focus efforts around retention and recruitment, awareness and activation of talent in those high school years, as well as leveling the inequities that exist in higher education, particularly those facing institutions serving Black students.
Very good. Thank you all for being our panel today. The first thing we want to unpack, because we know all of you are coming from different parts of the spectrum around these conversations of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is diversity? And when I was first speaking with our panel, they thought it was very important that we unpack this first to create a foundation to the conversation we're going to have today. So Jenn, would you read that definition?
Sure. The diversity definition refers to the existence of and variations of different characteristics in a group of people. These characteristics could be everything that makes us unique, such as our cognitive skills and personality traits, along with the things that shape our identity: race, age, gender, religion, sexual orientation, and cultural background, which are typically how we define them in our workspaces.
Right, very good, thank you. Our first question that we want to unpack today is, why should hiring for diversity be important? And why should it be a value that's built into the organization or our company's culture? Marco.
I think intrinsically it's the right thing to do. I think we can start there, right? Understanding that organizational culture is extremely important, because that's going to determine what the organization is going to do, where the organization is going to go, and how the organization is going to be successful. And if we understand the importance of baking in diversity into our organizational culture early on, I would say, but many of our organizations are past that, it puts us in a space and puts the organization in a space where you can be ready to receive different perspectives, different influences, and you can create better solutions for your customers, your product, and the folks around you. I'll stop there because I know I got a lot of folks that need to speak, so I'll lead it off with that.
I think, Jenn, you come from a space where you're talking to a lot of C-suite folks. Can you dive into a little bit of why is diversity important, and why should it be built into as a value, as a part of organizations or companies?
Yeah. I think that we're in a time when, kind of to piggyback off of what Marco is saying, doing the right thing is very important. And it's more important now probably than it has been in the past, because in the past we had this natural divide between our personal and professional lives, and we could be someone else at work, and our workplace could be somewhere else that we went to every day. Now you're in my home. And so it's a little bit different. And I think that when we are marketing to our product or service to the upcoming generation, Gen Z and beyond, it's going to be really important for us to be who we say we are, do what we say we value, and have that demonstrated and reflected in our employee base. And also, hopefully that will be reflective of the customer base that we're able to access. So I think it really ties to profitability. It ties to being able to access the whole talent pool, not just a piece of that. So there are a lot of things, and I will also digress because I know there are others that want to weigh in.
Todd, I see you smiling. What do you want to add to the?
Well, I'm coming trained as an architect, as I think I mentioned, working as an exhibit designer. My mother was actually a commercial interior designer. So I'm thinking of the cultural factor, and a lot of the discussion that we're having in DID, I should also say that it's a collaborative, transcending sectors and disciplines: architects, interiors, industrial design, UX, footwear, fashion. So when I think of diversity, I think of design, I think of like the problems that design solves for: the problem of housing, the problem of how we're fed, the problem of how we're housed, the problem of how we care for one another. And if we have a limited cultural view of who's contributing to like even how the problems are defined as such, And certainly beyond that, how do we solve them? What kind of bodies are we clothing? What kind of lifestyles are we housing? And when we don't have diversity, we have a very limited view, and therefore the design, like the world we live in, then is insufficient.
Yeah, yeah. I think our design community, especially honing in on a lot of that. I mean, that's how you're able to solve problems when you're able to have diverse teams versus singular style folks who are on a team. Christina, I know this is a huge value to you and the conversations that you're having with even the folks who are doing the hiring. So why should, and I know I'm going around with all of you guys answering this question, but I'm getting different segments to what that answer is, and it's creating more of a holistic conversation for folks to hear. So why should hiring for diversity be important, and what is that value it brings to organizations?
Yeah, I will kind of piggyback on what I've heard the other panelists talk about is culturally, it makes a difference in having a rich culture. When you have that diversity of culture, you absolutely do end up having teams that are more creative. They come up with better solutions. They really do are able to be responsive to the clients in a way that you don't have if you don't have that diversity.
Mm-hmm. That leads into our next question, which I will say a lot of our clients are already asking now during the RFP process, especially for architects and designers. They're asking for, what is your diversity initiative? Even for me on the dealer side, they are asking, what is your diversity initiative? And you will not have a seat at the table without those things. This is a tool companies should be embracing. That goes into our next question, which is how to hire for diversity within your organization, but how does that make your organization more competitive and yield greater returns? People are always looking for, what's the bottom line? This is not just something, the do-good anymore. This is creating a competitive edge for your organization. And I see, Marco, you're already unmuted yourself. So let's dive right into how this makes you by hiring folks. Let's get into it. Our clients are asking for it. Let's get into it.
I'll bite a chunk off, and then I'll pass the pie. When we already know, right? I'll assume everyone knows, but there may be someone on this Zoom. It's their first conversation on diversity. Research has shown that diverse teams outperform homogeneous teams 100% of the time, right? If you create a diverse board, it will outperform a homogeneous board. If you create a diverse team within an organization or at a separate organization, it will outperform the other team. And one of the reasons why is because the diversity of thought that's brought in from having people at the table with different perspectives, different understandings of life, and different life experiences. But if we're in a consumer-based, company where we're creating a product or we're servicing a customer, having someone on the team that thinks differently, that can create a solution that may address a segment of the population that someone else won't necessarily know about or have access to. Many times we have our cultural differences and we celebrate them, right? But we do have our differences. And therefore, there are some things that, as a straight Black male, that I just won't know about, just based on that. Whereas if you have someone on your team that's, let's just say from the Middle East, or a woman, or someone that's from the LGBTQ plus community, right? They can have an understanding of things that I don't necessarily have access to. And having them on a diverse team, having them on a team with it and providing that diversity can help create a solution, help give that team a different perspective that will end up with a better outcome. I'll stop there and pass it on to one of my colleagues.
Todd, how do you think this ties into architecture and design? I know we have layered on a few times already what diverse teams bring to the table. But
Yeah.
how does it make companies and organizations more competitive, especially when the clients are actually asking for it, and then they're wanting you to show your rap sheet, like show us what you've done.
I'm going to come at this in a slightly off way, probably. One of the things that, speaking from wearing my hat as did, but also just my career, I've been in nonprofits actually. So that one of the things we've done is to say, let's take our competitive hats off for a moment and solve for a real crisis for us as a nation. So maybe like competitively in a global context, we could talk about that, but really thinking about a triple bottom line where that social, the environmental crisis, all these things come together, and we can't afford not to sort of row together on this. And that being said, you know, I'm you know, as the nonprofit leader saying, put your competitive hats at the door. And at the same time, I think there's a real energy around the possibility of doing well in this space. So if we're all going in the same direction, I mean, you could say you're really losing it if you don't join this moving train. And then within that, we can pull and sort of push each other at different paces to get where we really need to be as a nation.
Yeah, really good. Jenn, you just unmuted yourself.
Yeah.
And I was also thinking of Christina, because she's at one of our top firms in our industry at Gensler. But Jenn, go ahead. Yes.
Yeah, I think kind of to piggyback off of Todd, I think it's cost of entry, right? So you don't have access anymore to not just competitive bidding processes, but also to demographics. You will, cancel culture is real. And I think cancel culture is accountability culture, right? It's holding people accountable to be who they say they are and to be good. And to do good in this world. And so I think when you are looking at having a product or service and trying to grow revenue as well as grow your customer base, it's almost required at this point, right? And so if you aren't, to Todd's point, on the train, you are left behind.
I have this next question teed up, and I want to hand this off to Christina, but I want to first give you an opportunity. Do you want to add anything to what was just said?
You know, I think that they've said it all. I mean, I would just end up piggybacking on what they've said. It really, they've encompassed it all.
So I'm going to read this tad bit of information. I like to do research before I do these types of events and not just lean on the amazing minds that are on the panel. But I also like to tie in data so that we can really understand these aren't just opinions that we're sharing, but there is data behind it. And so the other portion that we're going to talk about is creating that culture of belonging. So we've had a little bit of what is diversity, why is it important to my organization, the bottom line, but now let's get into the human aspect of all of it. Our brains receive over 11 million pieces of information every second. That is crazy. And we only process 40 of those details consciously. This makes us more than 99% unconscious. Sadly, this lack of awareness means we don't realize just how biased we are. So with that unpacking, because I mean, just a really good example is we've all driven in the Bay Area and gotten home in mad traffic and just realized, how did I get here? It was driving kind of on autopilot. So here's the question. How do you hire for the right reasons and have an awareness of your unconscious bias when looking at potential candidates? So Christina, I want you to kick this question off because
yes, that is one that I have a passion for sure. So my feeling is that you really have to be deliberate about building systems that create equity in your processes, because you can't assume that someone is going to be, clued into what their biases are and then respond to them appropriately. And so a couple of ways to do that and sort of the selection process is making sure that you have panels of interviewers and not just a single interviewer. And the panel, of course, should be a diverse representation of your firm and your kind of your culture, so that you have different views, different point of views that are assessing a candidate. If you have just a single person, their biases are going to come through, and it's unconscious. It's like it's unintentional, but they really do arise. And so, if you have other people that can balance, against what one person is seeing, then you have a better chance of hiring for diversity. The other thing that I like to do is have set questions that you're asking all of the candidates the same questions. If you don't do that, then someone who has a greater affinity for a particular candidate is going to go down a different road with that candidate and be much more familiar with them, and they'll have a bonding moment. And literally what does happen sometimes is they'll forget to ask them anything about the work or the job. They'll start talking about what they have in common, golf, whatever it may be, and they'll come out of that interview really feeling good about the person, the candidate, because they connected with them personally, as opposed to evaluated their skill set, evaluated their fit. And so when you have a set number of questions that you're asking everyone, then you're evaluating everyone equally. So you really do have to be deliberate about setting these systems up, because otherwise, left to their own devices, people really will just kind of go the way of their comfort zone, as opposed to being equitable in their evaluation.
That is such a small detail, but the way you unpack that, it makes such a bit, just making sure that the questions are the same. And it's true, we've all had bonding moments in interviews, and you're
Sure.
like, yeah, I nailed it.
Right.
Right.
I actually even,
yeah.
sorry, I actually even often coach my hiring managers to understand you're not hiring a friend. You are hiring someone to do this position. So, it may be great that you connect with them. That's wonderful, but you're not hiring a friend.
Yeah, love that. Jenn, want to hop in here?
Sure. I think we have to kind of take it back a step from me and really talk about multicultural spaces. And so when you have an environment, if you are starting with kind of your foundation built and you have a multicultural space, this is an easy question to answer. If you are starting with a culture that is based on one centristic culture, then you probably have a lot of work to do. And it is, to Christina's point, building frameworks that account for unconscious bias or even sometimes conscious bias. But I also think it's doing your individual work and having some level of accountability around, as a leader, around how that might show up, right? So when we talk about hiring, I think it's, let's look at the pattern in your hiring. Let's take a review of this team's pattern of hiring, and then let's make adjustments. I think you have to start with the knowns so that you can find the unknowns and kind of move from there. So that I'll just step back and let somebody else jump in.
Marco, you gave a really good example when we were kind of unpacking these questions offline with the entire panel. But I also want to get Todd in here from the design perspective as well, especially around our awareness of unconscious bias. Marco, you said something about a pimple, and you shared a story based around a pimple. Can you share that story with the audience? Because I think it's a really good illustration.
Well, I will, and I want to unpack one thing that I heard from one of my esteemed panelists. And when you have a panel interview, I think it's important. It's very important. I think it's necessary to diversify and have a panel discussion, and it's also absolutely necessary to ask the same amount of questions. One point that we miss many times in that, though, is you have to make sure that if you're going to diversify the panel, and you have people there that come from traditionally underrepresented backgrounds, understand that if they're the only one on the panel, they feel just as alienated as the candidate. So I'll use an example, just using myself. If I'm on a panel and I'm the one Black person and then there's 9 white people, let's just, and, we're dealing with, candidates of different backgrounds, I may not feel comfortable enough in that space to speak honestly. I may think that you all are, all the other panelists would think that I'm having favoritism towards someone from my own race. And it kind of defeats the purpose of having, the diversity on the panel. And so I would say you need to spread out the diversity, right? And not only that, but then also make sure that the people on the team are of similar hierarchy, similar ranking, right? Because if there are senior people who are one demographic and then there are, less senior people who are of a different demographic, then that can create a problem as well. And then you don't necessarily get the outcome that you're looking for, because again, it's not necessarily a safe space for someone within an organization to speak up and speak truly about how they truly feel about a candidate. Does that make sense to everyone?
Yeah.
Yes. I'll let Todd go, and then I'll come back to the pimple. I want to make sure that he has the time.
I want to hear the pimple, actually. Didn't realize go with the pimple. I can wait.
No, Todd, go right ahead. Just go right ahead. I want to make sure that
I can be brief because I could be so at length. And design is unique, and one of the things that uniquely challenging to address these questions, because it's at root cultural, and you go back to like how we learn design, and it's already in many ways inherently Eurocentric. Things like basics like a portfolio review. So in other positional interviews, you're not showing your creative work, and the kind of judgments that are, that like what is good is already so culturally focused that I mean, it's both conscious and unconscious. And so I think one of the things that we're trying to do at DID right now is just to begin to aggregate what are those like many barriers that accumulate from jump, from even before you get into school, from like the ways that Black culture is filtered out broadly in the way that impacts design decision making. And I think we're endeavoring to create a set of unlearning tools that really get at just the different threshold moments. And I zoom in on the portfolio as one of those. The notion of cultural fit as it manifests in design is not just about friends, but even my colleague Forrest Young talks about like the playlist and in the office, and you're doing this so we think of creative teams and they're kind of vibing together, but like whose vibe is vibing, right? And so there's just so many, it's just, I could go out at length, and we're just at the beginning of a process of aggregating almost anecdotally so many perspectives. Just the last thing I'll say that we're learning from DID, in my own experience, so many design firms are also, they're smaller firms or they're less formally organized. They don't have best practices in HR for anyone. So these questions are just super, informal and almost personal. And so I think one of the wonderful things about DID is bringing large organizations that have embedded HR and DEI practices in dialogue with smaller organizations that just have never been there, and sharing some best practices. And I love this conversation. I'm so curious about the pimple.
So Marco, Christina mentioned something about a portfolio review. And Christina, you may have to unpack that first before Marco is able to explain the analogy that he gave using the pimple, but I thought it was a really good analogy because it kind of hones in on it, but it might tie to this next question that I want to move on to. And Christina, we can start with you again, or I can just verbally unpack it, and Marco, you can explain exactly what it is so that Todd's curiosity is resolved there.
Let's keep Todd waiting a little bit longer.
So I'm gonna ask this question here. What are some hiring blind spots that we often get wrong when we're attempting to hire diverse candidates? And Christina, this is when you mentioned portfolio review. And Todd, I know you just talked about this a little bit, and then Marco, you can unpack the pimple analogy. But Christina, will you share that? Because
sure, absolutely. Yeah.
the IIDA audience.
Yes, absolutely. So one area that I see a blind spot is hiring managers can have a tendency to reject diverse candidates for minor reasons. And they frankly do evaluate their diverse candidates at a higher standard than the non-diverse candidates. And so I did have a situation where there was an individual who people loved. You talked about fit, Todd. I mean, but they felt person is the right fit. Education, everything. They had their portfolio, solid portfolio, but there was in the back of their portfolio, there was one page where they had drawings. A drawing, actually, it was a single drawing. And frankly, that drawing was not good. I mean, it frankly was not. But everything else about the candidate was positive. And so the hiring manager took a look at that and says, oh no, gosh, we can't hire this person. They have a bad drawing in their portfolio. But literally everything else about the candidate was very good, positive. And so we have to make sure that we're not looking for ways to reject our diverse candidates in very small ways that frankly, I have to say, had that been a non-diverse candidate who had all of these other positives and that one, drawing that was not great, they would not have been rejected. I'm sorry, they just wouldn't have. And so we have to make sure that we're not using a different standard that's a higher standard in evaluating and accepting our diverse candidates. And so now we get the pimple story.
Got it. So what I'd like to do is I want to preface this first with some basic facts on DEI, right? And I'll center this in the United States culture, right? If you were born and raised in the United States, unless you've done some significant training and learning on your own, you probably have a lot of bias within you. And there's more than likely some anti-Blackness within you, right? And anti-brownness and a lot of things within you. And so what I tell hiring managers is you have to go in and understand that you probably won't like the diverse candidate. And I say that without seeing a resume, without knowing anything about them. Just the way that we're set up, the way our culture is set up, you probably won't like the diverse candidate. And what far too often happens is, to Christina's point, it's easy to hone in on one little minor thing and focus on it and blow it out of proportion. And so, in this instance, it's like a pimple, right? You can notice something that should be small, something that should be ignored. But in your mind, it's aggravating. You see it, it's extremely big. It's throbbing in your head. And in her example, is a drawing on the back, right? And in other examples, is, they went to this university instead of this university. They only stayed at this company 2 years instead of 3 years. Why is that? And far too often when we're dealing with candidates from diverse backgrounds, we put them through this extra layer of scrutiny. And we don't do it intentionally. Let me take that back. Most people don't do it intentionally. I know that we talk about unconscious bias, and that's extremely important, but we have to be realistic and say there are consciously biased people in the world, right? And some of them are in hiring positions. And so, but more often than not, you don't even realize it. It's just a part of how we're set up. And so you have to make sure that you set up some safeguards in your own mind to understand, I'm coming to the table with these biases. There are probably going to be some things that I don't like about this candidate that if I knew the candidate was from a different background or had a different cultural belief system, I may not put that much emphasis on those things. And so that's I know there's a lot of build up for the pimple story, but that's all it was.
I do want to say something here, because we're using these words and these conversations are not easy to have. And this is work we all need to do together. Speaking to us and the audience, when we use bias, it's okay to understand we all have them, just like we have a bias for food or what neighborhood we want to live in, all of these things. It isn't wrong because that's the way our human brain is. What is wrong is when you apply them to something. So I know that for some, and I'm just wondering if that maybe triggers to some folks in the audience when they're hearing it. It's like, ooh, instead of the ill around it, if we could just say, we have these things, we're acknowledging that we have these things, and then how do we help be aware to remove some of those blinders and say, I'm gonna look beyond that and really see this human candidate and really take a deeper dive and a look at them, a second, a third look. Even if it's almost like an exercise, it needs to be sort of a lifestyle that you integrate within your company culture and hopefully within yourself as well. And Todd, you unmuted yourself. So do you want to add
I'm
to
feeling
that?
some inspiration. And I just channeling, you know, I have the benefit of now for the last 60 days, like all we talk about from so many brilliant individuals, including, so present company included, but this is what I'm doing. So I'm channeling different thoughts and different perspectives, and I'm glad to share them here. But one of the ways that diversity is interesting, because while it's challenging, the word itself has almost a kind of blandness to it. And I wonder, when we think of another word that's very trendy recently, like disruptive, like that is a bad word. I mean, it could have been, but now we've embraced it. Like every company wants to be disruptive, right? So and for me, the difficulty of diversity, the discomfort of real diversity, the fact that when you are truly inclusive, there is a kind of displacing of the things that we knew.
Yeah.
And like, but what if we could think of it in the way that we shifted our beliefs about disruptive and really could, instead of blandifying diversity, like, oh, it's just some flavors, it's hard. But when you move through that hard and you're in a different place, like these tech bros in the 90s disrupted entire industries. What if we thought of the joy of where we'll be when we're in this new, that seemingly uncomfortable place? And I'm sort of riffing off again my friend Forrest Young, but I think this is where we're trying to head with DID, and hopefully we could, and design, if nothing else, can also take an idea of discomfort and suddenly we want to sit there, right? That's where we need to be.
I did peek in the chat, and I did see Robert Strand quote Marco Lindsey. I did like that, because Marco, you planted something that I hope would help people just to own it, and almost kind of what Todd's talking about, just owning this and then going beyond it. And I can't wait to hear from the audience, because I can see a ton of folks, questions being asked and hands being raised. So we're going to get to you. We only have 2 more questions here. But let's move on to the next thing. Hiring for diverse talent isn't enough. We all know that, because you can get hired, you can check the box, you can have women on leadership, but the workplace experience is what shapes whether people remain or if they thrive. And there's actually a statistic, Elliot, if you want to share that, 41% of new candidates, yeah, here it is, 41% of new hires fail within the first 18 months due to poor culture fit. That's humongous. And right now with COVID and people redesigning their lives and thinking about where they want to have alignment, what companies fit their value system, where they want to be, let's unpack the next question. We talk about attracting and retaining diverse candidates and all of that. And if it has to do with a poor culture fit, and today, and Marco, I love that you added this. So here we go. In today's work environment that's now hybrid, how can companies create a systematic approach to embracing belonging and become inclusive organizations? We're all like working from home now. And Christina, you had some really good examples of what Gensler is doing. I really like for us to share, like, how do we create belonging in this hybrid work environment? And then how are we thinking about it to the future of when we return to the office again?
I mean, some of the things that we're doing, especially again with people onboarding remotely and remaining remotely for extended periods of time, is we're creating like virtual coffee chats where we bring together various members of other teams, not their own team, because they do at least have the interface with their own teams. But what we want is to have them get a sense of the broader culture of the firm, and they can get that sense if they're meeting other people virtually, albeit, but they don't have that opportunity otherwise in the offices. So we're bringing in kind of these coffee chats. The other thing is, with our onboarding, we're sending out welcome packages, and it's kind of twofold. We have obviously the Gensler swag as a kind of a baseline, but we're making it specific to the regions that they are working in. And so in San Francisco, they'll get sourdough bread in addition to the Gensler swag. In Texas, they'll get barbecue sauce. And so kind of personalizing it on that level to really embrace individuals and make them feel like they are very much a part of the firm.
Oh, I like that. Jenn, I know you're super passionate about this. Do you want to share some insights around how companies can create a culture of belonging, even in a hybrid working world?
Yeah, I think that there are some industries that will go back to an office, and there are some industries where this will be the new way of working. And so we all need to kind of embrace this very quickly. One thing that we're doing that I think is unique for big or small format business is that we allow people to come together and belong in groups on their own. And that is, we empower folks to come together. Normally starts with a Slack channel. And that helps them to feel included because they are within an identity group that provides support, insight. You were talking, Christina, about onboarding and new hires. I think that supports them transitioning into an environment where it is totally virtual. You won't have that water cooler or lunchroom talk, right? I also think that we need to really embrace multiculturalism in our spaces. People speak differently. People want to connect differently. People live in different environments and feel different levels of comfort, especially right now with COVID and how it's impacting folks. And so providing spaces, providing monetary support, providing leadership support for people to come together in ways that supports their identity and how they feel seen, heard, and recognized, I think is really important when you're talking about feeling included.
Yeah. Marco, you had some thoughts around this, but I'm also thinking this next question might be something that you might want to hop on to. So I'm going to ask this next one here. How critical is it for companies to, because let me just back up. When we talk about belonging and attracting and retaining talent, one of the biggest ways, especially in our industry and with designers, architects, is the pathway to leadership or that next level is not always clear. There's not a lot of transparency around it. I've heard this conversation with designers, maybe even folks in the tech industry, even on the dealer side, which is where I have gone to. So I want to ask this question, and I want us all to dive into it because I think it's really important, and I'd love to get all of you guys' thoughts around this. How critical is it for companies to ensure a level playing field in career advancement opportunities within the industry, and how should they deploy analytics, whether they be tools to show how promotions are made, the pay process, and the criteria behind them, and being transparent? Marco.
Thank you. I will just address the last question just quickly and say that organizations need to move from a culture fit to culture act. If you
can you say that again? You went out just a tiny bit. Yeah. Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Yep. Organizations, can you hear me? Mm-hmm. Organizations need to focus more, less on a culture fit and more on a culture add. Far too often when we get people to fit the culture, we're just repeating the same people. We're repeating the same mistakes and we're getting, you know, the same results that we've always gotten. We need to understand that we want people that are different so that way they can add to the culture, bring more to the culture and make the organization better. And so I'll throw that out there, you know, to address the last question quickly. And, you know, in this and what we're talking about, you know, career advancement and analytics, I'll always preface this, and this is, you know, extremely important, especially when we talk about analytic tools, to say that in every organization, you know, no matter what the analytic tool is, you know, no matter what the number is, if usually the people on the bad side of the number, they're never in the C-suite, right? So if 70% of your organization are happy with whatever is going on, the 30% never involves the C-suite. The 30% is never part of the decision-making process. And we have to remember that, because whatever number whatever the demarcation line is that you find to be good or acceptable, you have to understand that the folks that are there are usually the ones that are most marginalized, the ones that are usually left out, the ones that have the least amount of voice. And the reason that is important is because, you know, as we're talking about building our culture, building our organization, the more that we leave those people out, the more that they go and tell the story about how bad it is to work for us, how bad the products is that they're receiving from us, and it goes on and on. And so I think that's extremely important, especially when you talk about career trajectory, when you're talking about the products that you're building and the customers that are going to receive it and have to use that. And so I'll stop. I know we don't have that much time, so I'll hand it off to someone else.
Yeah. Todd.
Yeah, this is a really rich source of conversation or point of conversation. I think there's a few things I will say about this. One is the metaphors that we use to think about advancement and recruitment that we've begun to move away from within DID. We often talk about a pipeline, and it sort of suggests like oil wells and extraction, and also kind of a very linear relationship of a company to a person, and almost like you're capturing this talent. And I've been talking about pathways. Forrest Young, for example, has been talking about a garden, but this notion of like the liberty and exploration of a career. And you think of, you know, some of the firms that I worked for, I know that as a young man, that firm owner was at another firm and then started. So like thinking of like, how do we elevate leadership, not only within, but like across an industry or even across sectors. Tom Ford, the fashion designer, makes movies. So like this is a little bit outside of the data point, but I think if we open up how we're thinking about advancement across sectors, across firms, setting up people to form their own businesses, again, it refuses a little bit of a competitive mindset and shifts into something else.
I love that. Pathways instead of pipeline. Even the word just sounds better coming out, especially when we're talking about the human experience. Pipeline does not relate. Pathways, that feels great. That feels really good. Christina, you're on mute.
No, sorry. There is something that we are trying to achieve, and I will admit we haven't yet, but it's a concept that I brought from the legal industry, in which you devise a system where you have agnostic assignments. And so you essentially, you know, from the legal industry, associates would input into a database what their skills were, what their interests are, kind of where they want to see their path, and you assign people to a case, or in the architecture and design industry, to a project based on what you see in the database, as opposed to going to the person that you always select and going, you know, just the person outside of your, you know, outside of your office, or just your favorites. Then you're really just evaluating and you're selecting people based on that criteria, as opposed to based on the people that you have an affinity for. So that's something that we're working towards. I will say we haven't arrived there yet. But that is, the way to make sure that you extend the opportunity to everyone to have those experiences and to work with various clients and on projects.
Yeah, I even like your vulnerability, ensuring we haven't arrived there yet. This is not the destination. This is a journey. And I want organizations to understand, companies to understand, this is a journey.
Absolutely.
And that's going to lead into our next question. But I also want to get Jenn into this conversation because I know you deal with a lot of leaders. But can you unpack a little bit about diving into this and creating that culture of belonging and transparency through career advancement for folks?
Yeah, I think there are two questions there, right? So it's level playing field and also analytics and transparency. I'll talk about the transparency first. I think that's a cultural concept that you either embrace or reject. And so it really is about creating this infrastructure or framework that supports having full transparency of the numbers that you collect. Because in a virtual world, I can't see the people that are on the team, that used to be down the hall and around the corner. And so I don't really know if I'm one of one or if I'm one of 100. I have no clue, right? And so I think being transparent at all levels is really important, especially virtually, so that we can see what we're dealing with. You got to know what you're dealing with before you can solve the problem that presents. I think that also helps with leadership accountability and that transparency as well, because you can hold your leaders to account. And then the second piece, I think level playing field, right? So that also is infrastructural. Too often we expect for people in marginalized groups to have the same level of access. And access is about connection, right? And so it really is about who you know, not what you know when you get to a certain level. And so I think that has to be intentional. And I think it has to be built for people. It's not something that I think is fair for people to come in and be tasked with, especially in the virtual world. How would I connect with people that I've never met, right? In ways that really form real bonds and real relationships. So I think having a sponsorship model is important. Having those belonging groups, which is what I was touching on earlier, that's important because collective voices make change. And so having that as an access point to senior leadership or execs, and also having a mentorship program is really, really important so that people get that sponsorship, but also that coaching and support and counseling and listening ear that they need to be competitive in this multicultural environment.
Yeah, I loved how you even gave some ideas and some thoughts behind it. And one of the things that Christina even mentioned, I believe both you and Jenn, you and Christina mentioned when we first had this call a couple of days ago, you guys were talking, gosh, I just lost that thought. Man, I hate when that happens. I hate when that happens. It's going to come back to me. But Christina, you gave a really good example, and Jenn, you led on to that, and it was just there. Oh, okay. Let's head into the next question. I'm hoping it comes back to me. I really don't like when that happens because it was a good one. I'm going to go back because I took notes during that call, and hopefully it's there. That's how I remembered the pimple thing with Marco. Anyway, why should companies place their core business leaders and managers at the heart of DE&I efforts beyond the HR function or employee resource groups? This is the last question, and then we're going to open it up to the audience. But I think this is super important, and also holding business leaders and companies accountable for their progress and showing where they are, their starting point, and the real numbers, because without that, how are you tracking the progress? So that's our last bit here. I hope that thought comes back to me. But Christina, do you want to unpack that?
I will, because this is another thing that I feel very strongly about is, diversity, inclusion, equity is everyone's responsibility. And we run the risk of absolving people of that responsibility when we designate it or delegate it, if you will, to your DEI professionals or your HR professionals. when you have individuals who are said to be responsible for it, then other people can say, well, I don't really have to do anything because the DEI director has it or the HR has it, whoever it is. And I just think that's, you are, that's just the wrong way to approach it and the wrong way to think about it. So it has to be top down, everyone's responsibility. Everyone plays a part. Everyone doesn't have to play the same part because everyone can't play the same part, but it really should be top of mind always for everyone in the organization.
Yeah, 100%. Marco, I saw you smiling.
Yes, I mean, she hit the nail on the head. And if you think about it, diversity, equity, and inclusion are in all aspects of your organization.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can't necessarily have one person focusing on that. And if, I guess, an example, that I say that, but that doesn't mean necessarily fire your diversity person, right? I'm not putting that out there. But, a company has a CFO, but everyone needs to be concerned about the budget. Right? Everyone needs to be focused on whether we have revenue and, how we're spending our money. Right. And so, when you think about these topics, when you're thinking about, the diversity of the organization, and I want to make sure everyone understands that, diversity and inclusion are three very different topics. They're related, right? They're like cousins, but they're not the same. Right. And making sure that people feel included, make sure they want to be there. Right. But making sure they're different. Right. And making sure that you have equitable solutions for all of them. And equity and equality are very different. Right. And equality, if we're talking about equality, is, everyone on this call, if we're going to feed them, everyone on this call that you see gets apple pie. Well, I'm allergic to apples, so that wouldn't be right to give that to me. That's not an equitable solution. And so what we have to do is take the time out to make sure that we find out, what works for our people, what's going to help them optimize their lives themselves. And not just their work life, right? Because now there's no difference between work and home anymore, right? I think most of the people on this call are at home, right? But they're doing work. And so how can you make sure that you're creating solutions that work for them individually? And so that's how we have to think about it. And that's how everyone has to think about it. Every hiring manager has to think about that when they're hiring a person. Every manager has to think about that when they're working with their team and evaluating the work from their team. Every leader of the organization has to think about that for their entire department, right? And every chief executive officer has to think about that for the organization. And so, yep.
Todd, I'd love for you to jump in here on this last question around putting leaders in the center of the DEI, not just HR or the resource groups.
Not sure I'm adding substance, but maybe just a different metaphor. And again, coming from a design perspective, we've talked about the problem with cultural fit and moving towards cultural add. I think when we think about diversity as an HR problem, we're tending to borrow some metaphors of organizations and boxes and charts and structures. But if we think that actually businesses, corporations, small firms are organizations that have cultures and we need to change them, then I actually think we need to apply our design thinking to the organization and redesign. And that's holistic, and that involves everyone. And we can't just fit so it's not about fitting something into existence, it's about rethinking the whole thing. And that is that uncomfortable place I was talking about before. But if we embrace it as a design, then maybe it's something exciting, and we don't know what it's going to look like. But and it's not even, top also implies, a pyramid. So perhaps in including like who's typically, I used to organize museums. So like at the bottom, the janitors, the clerks, like we have to rethink holistically, like no one's on the bottom and no one's on the top to really push this change through in fundamental ways.
I love that.
So it's strategic at the end of the day.
Thank you, panel, for unpacking some serious major questions, but I think that you have also led our audience to be inspired and walk away. I have some great notes from the conversation today, using even different verbiage, pathways versus pipelines. That is going to stick with me. And I even saw the chat light up on that. I'd love to open this up now for the audience and get them to participate, ask questions, and even become part of the panel. And we're going to have sort of a roundtable discussion now. Are we going to keep our hold on. Are we going to keep the recording going, or are we going to stop the recording? The reason why, Lisa, you had a comment, and I was receiving a text message earlier, so I want to add that in here. And I'm being super open here because this is supposed to be a conversation. Like, we're all in our living rooms. I'm in my kitchen. So, Lisa, if you can uncamera yourself, and if you like, we can cut this out. But what I would love is there's such richness that comes from folks being brave, folks being vulnerable, and unmuting and uncameraing themselves and engaging with the panel, but also just engaging together, because we can all learn from each other. And I like for the next 30 minutes to just be that, really. Mm-hmm. That's where all the good, juicy, good stuff comes from. So Lisa, please.
I have a question, just, going through this process and the evolution of starting to talk about the topic and having the responsibility to open it up to employees. So it isn't just a top-down kind of approach and us trying to figure it out and then, disperse what we want to do as a culture within a practice. Do you all have any suggestions for how to create safe space for employees to have open, safe conversations with each other, knowing that, biases could come up, comments could be made that could offend someone or hurt someone? How do we get past that barrier of the sort of silence and quiet and politeness that we've always had to have with each other in the past, because it seemed like it wasn't the right thing to talk about in an employment setting? But how do we create, or what do you suggest for creating that open dialogue with employees so that they feel not only comfortable with each other, but also with leaders and can talk about personal, professional experiences and suggestions within an organization? So it's more of a question that I would love to get some feedback on from others.
I can tell you what I've done in the past is invited groups to come together, and as part of the invitation, I would put in the invitation, we're going to have conversations and it's going to be a judgment-free zone. Mm-hmm. And come in, feel comfortable speaking about whatever you want, ask questions, share your stories, share your experiences, and come in knowing that this is a judgment-free zone. Mm-hmm. So I just put that right out there from the start. Yeah. And then people have a different level of comfort. They don't feel like someone's going to, and things come up that frankly wouldn't if you didn't put that out there from the start.
Yeah, there's a real vulnerability around it. And we've started to do this within our practice, and my concern was, do you just freestyle it, get everybody in there and see what happens? Do you have a coach? Do you have a moderator? And we ended up freestyling it, and it ended up being a pretty rich conversation, but it was just getting through that kind of initial gate of I wonder how this is going to go. But I love that idea of saying, okay, judgment-free zone, and we're going to put it out there.
I'd like to build on that judgment-free zone. And so there are a few things that we do, that we talk about at the beginning of a meeting like this that we would have. I'll just give a few examples. Is one, tell people from the gate, expect non-resolution, right? We're not going to solve all the world's problems in an hour, 2 hour, 3 hour long conversation. These issues have been going on for hundreds of years. We're going to have a discussion about it. We're going to get better about it. Then also let people know that we're all on a journey. right? I do DEI for work, right? I study it, but I'm not there. There's no one there, right? We're just all on a journey, and what we're trying to do is get better. And I think that if we can lead with that and say, hey, I'm on this journey. I'm going to get some things wrong, right? I'm gonna mess up, but I'm trying. Can you have some grace with me, right? And if you create that backdrop, then people begin to be more receptive and more open to receiving what you have to say. I'd say also speak from your own experiences, right? Don't. It's not good to come in a conversation. Well, I heard, or my neighbor did. No. What are you feeling? You know, what are the things that you've experienced? That makes the conversation more authentic, and it gives people less the opportunity to you know, say the stuff that we hear online, because you know, things are said online. Lastly, one thing that I always promote is the feedback loop, right? And I say this everywhere I go, but leaders within an organization need to go to their teams and tell them how they want to receive feedback. And so I'm the leader. I'm going to tell everyone on my team how I want to receive feedback, whether that's in person, whether that's same day, whether it's email, whether it's 24 hours later. I recommend writing it down, so that way you have this and you know, because as you continue to deal with this person, you'll know how they want to give feedback. And the leader does it and models it. What happens is now the leader is usually the most intimidating person to give feedback to, right? Because they're the one who's promoting me. They're the one who's paying me, right? And if I know that I can give him or her feedback, what that does is it gives me a voice that I may not have known I had before. Now I'm more willing and open to telling you, hey, you kind of screwed up on that one, right? Which could save the organization a lot of money. I mean, if you think of it in that terms, but then also it creates a space for me to talk to the team members, right? Okay, our leader wants to receive feedback. Let's talk about how we receive feedback. Now the entire team is giving one another feedback, and that can be on everything, right? That can be on these tough conversations that we have around equity and bias and diversity, but that can also be around the project, right? Hey, at this level of the project, you forgot to do this, right? And now that I know how to give you feedback, I know that you're not going to take it wrong. You're not going to think that I'm watching over you. You're not going to think that I'm trying to, I'm out for you. And so those are my quick suggestions.
Thank you.
That's all really good. We have quite a few people. Lisa, thank you for kicking this off.
You're welcome.
And thank you for just coming off screen there. We have Fabiola and Tom. Fabiola or Tom, if you want to now become part of the panel, or if you would like to just use your voice and ask the question to the folks. Both of you. Look at that. I love it.
Hi.
Hi,
Hello,
Fabiola.
I'm here too. Fabiola, you go first.
Oh, okay. Well, thank you for this conversation. This has been really enlightening. And one of the big questions I have is, as a Mexican American, I have bias as well. And I'm in that journey as well to educate myself, to learn and to understand the biases that I have and correct them. From your journeys in education, are there any podcasts or books you would recommend that we continue reading after this panel event to continue the education?
Love that. Jenn, Marco, Todd, Christina.
So I'm reading something right now that I think when it gains traction, it will be something that will revolutionize how we look at the work that we need to do in a organizational space, in the workspace. It's called The Somatic Abolitionist. And it's by, I can.
Okay, yes, you can say it, but then in a few minutes, can you put that in the chat for folks?
Yeah, it's a really good book. It is about how we carry these things in our bodies, right? It's a different approach. It's not just the mental situation that we typically talk about, where we talk about we want to get rid of unconscious bias. That unconscious bias lives in our bodies. And so it really talks about how do you work that through so that when you're approaching situations, you're approaching it with a different posture.
Wow.
I love that. I look forward to reading that. That sounds really interesting.
That's really powerful. Does anybody else? So I do want to say this. Tova Cook creates the current every month, and part of this portion is going to have tons of resources, podcasts, things like that. So Fabiola, we will make sure that we are addressing that along with all of our panelists and ways to get in touch with them. But Marco or Christina or Todd, do you guys have anything you want to share with Fabiola as far as resources that she can continue on?
Sure. I don't have a book, but I do have a person that I can point you to who does TED Talks and I'm sure podcast, Vernee Myers. She is a current, her title is Director of Diversity Inclusion, something like that is her title at Netflix. But prior to that, she has done a lot of training on unconscious bias and has a full body of work associated with that. And so you can certainly view her TED Talks. I know she has, I'm sure she would have some videos on YouTube as well. And she's a really dynamic speaker and pretty frank. So I think you'd enjoy her podcast.
Somebody just put that in the chat as well. Thank you. The chat is blowing up. There's tons of people asking questions, even on my phone. You guys, Tom or Todd.
Oh, let me just give a resource.
Yeah.
Yeah, one of the things that many of our collaborators have been citing, and there's multiple resources on this channel platform called Where Are the Black Designers? The first conference was in 2020. There was one this year, but a lot of discussions in media and resources that are specific to the design professions.
That's really good. And you were quoting someone quite a bit tonight.
Yes, so actually there will be a DID recording of our first dialogue. So some of the pathways and the joy, actually, I also say joy. Sometimes we mind merge, but Dwayne Edwards is also a great thinker inside of DID and advisor. Yocosta, LaChapelle, Sani, Jasmine, Stein. So we were just in conversation last week and we'll be sharing that on our channels for DID. We don't have any other resources, but stay tuned. Maybe in 6 months or so, we'll have some things of our own.
Very good. Very good. If you don't mind putting those names in the chat or sending me those names, and then I can send out to the audience who joined today and just kind of getting these. I want to put together a list and just put it on LinkedIn as well. Todd, thank you so much. Tom, you're up.
Yes. Hello. Yes, I want to respond to something that Todd said earlier that really resonated with me, and I think we all could respond to it. You said there are times we need to put aside our competitive hats and talk to each other. And I'm a big supporter of the fabulous community that we have here in San Francisco, because I think that we do, as a community, do talk to each other a lot and we share a lot. However, there's always more work to be done. What can we be doing? If you can give us some ideas of things that we can be doing to be reaching outside of our own individual companies, to be, if anything else, raising community standards about all of these issues, so that we keep the dialogue going. Otherwise, when the dialogue stops, that's when it can get weak and die. So just to keep it going, what suggestions would you have that we could be doing in addition to amazing events like this? And I do think that Rashanda should have her own news talk show. But yes, so Todd, any suggestions you have, I think would be really appreciated.
That's a great question. Well, organizationally, we would like DID to be that place, but we also are small and mighty and growing. So we can only facilitate so much dialogue. We're growing from 20 to 40 organizations in the next month. That are across the country. I think where we'd like to be in a year is that we have some regional kind of dialogues percolating based on where our organizations are. So actually, Northern Southern California could be one of those places, Chicago, where I'm based, New York, Detroit. But in the meantime, it was interesting how DID came to be. It was, while these are, Miller Knoll is not a grassroots organization by any means, but there was a spirit of organizing to it that we can't do this alone. And I think meanwhile, I just mentioned Where Are the Black Designers? There are grassroots organizations as people just came together to solve and address these issues. And I think that one can do that. You don't need to, I mean, as much as I'd love for you to join DID in the future as we grow and we continue to have that invitation open to learn more about our network. I also think it's like, look around and, you know, like the civil rights movement, the gay rights movement, I mean, all these movements started with people just looking around, gathering together. It's so much, in some ways, funny, easier to do now with a Zoom and Teams and all these tools that we have, because we don't have to like necessarily get out of our house and find a space and rent a space, or is it a park bench? It's like this amazing free tools that we gather and organize. So I encourage you to take that spirit of advocacy and activism and grassroots organizing as part of the work as designers. We can do that.
I love
Marvelous.
that.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you for the question.
Yeah. Important.
Thank you, Tom.
Sure. Thank you.
So we have a ton of questions in the chat and the Q&A. So I just want to say we have just under 15 minutes left. And I want to apologize to anyone we are not able to get to. But we will try to answer as many questions in the time that we have. Lisa, Wei, if you want to unmute yourself, or if you just want to get on camera, not on camera, whichever you feel most comfortable with. I don't know if I should say you're on mute.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Sorry about that.
No worries.
Yeah, so I have a small business in Oakland, and you know, I hire talented individuals in the Bay Area. And I guess my question is, you know, I'm really interested in hiring for diversity, but I'm having a hard time attracting a diverse pool of people. Can you provide any recommendations on what we can do to make this a welcoming environment for people to apply? Thanks.
Marco, Jenn, you just came off mute. You can start there. Todd, Christina.
Yeah, I guess I would ask, what equitable practices have you put in place, or equitable frameworks have you put in place in your business to prepare the space for diversity to enter, right? People want to come where they're welcomed, but they really want to come where they have been intentionally prepared for. And so that is something that you can advertise if you've done that work. If you haven't done that work, I encourage you to start with equity, then comes diversity. Then once you get people in the door, then comes inclusion and belonging. But equity is the framework that you should start with prior to trying to attract folks into your space.
Say, in addition to that, rather than thinking about attracting the talent, I would just proactively go out and find the talent. I mean, you can do searches on LinkedIn and, you know, find diverse talent that way. You can do it. I'm not sure what kind of what your business is, but or kind of what the roles are that you're looking for, but you can look in industry we call it industry communities, and just go proactively and find them. And honestly, if someone reaches out and to a diverse candidate proactively, they really feel like, okay, this person is really interested in me and wants me. So it may not be that they're looking and they may not come to you, but I would say go to them.
That's big, Christina. They may not even be looking, and you might just see a talented person and you reach out to them and say, hey, I'm familiar with your work, or I've seen you. You strike me as a really strong candidate. I'd love to have coffee with you or conversation. I think actually starting from that place is really good. Todd and Marco, do you guys have anything to add to Lisa's question?
I'll quickly add that, you know, I've don't know, anything about your firm. I don't know anything about your practice, your postings, but we have found that many times some people have, if you go with traditional wording of you can pull wording from someone else's site. Sometimes some of those things have been found to be not as inclusive or as welcoming to, candidates from diverse backgrounds as others. And so, that's something that you can look into. I mean, there are organizations, there are even software, recruitment software that you can have that can help you with that. But then also, there's a ton of affinity groups out there for, people from different backgrounds. And are you tapping into them? And I just say, Google it. I mean, literally you can Google Latinx, whatever, right? And, it may be on the second page of Google, right? But you can find, and there'll probably be an affinity group there that you can reach out to for whatever subject matter that your organization is focused in. And you can reach out to them, have a conversation, say, we're hiring for this role. Can you send this out to your organization? People want jobs, right? People are looking for gainful employment. And if your organization is doing great things and you're able to connect with them, they'd be happy to share that with their membership.
Yeah. I guess I want to tap back into what Jenn said and frame it in a slightly different way of like, what does that work to make your organization ready to be inclusive and have a diversified workforce? And I do think in that what I was talking about before in that organizational design, when we're at the point of looking to hire, like it's too late. You could argue, and that doesn't make sense, but like it's like backing up and thinking, okay, where does my organization sit? What is the culture that we manifest? The boundaries of like, where do we, where is our corporate social responsibility? Where is our community outreach? How do we connect? Like, where are we located in our city? Where do people of color live and how? So it's like all those things of like, then the individuals who are leaders, like who is in my network? So beginning to sort of unpack that, then obviously it's a long game, like and not to say that you have to get everything perfect before you find or search for the candidates, but that process of searching and unpacking and understanding the boundaries, to do that work deeply, it's going to take time. But then if you think about how we, particularly, and I'm saying this as someone that I went to Princeton, I went to Columbia, I had every kind of privilege and push, and then every kind of obstacle as well. But I know how those network effects work. And then suddenly when you're in a sort of swimming in a different lane, different kinds of people show up. So we have to get out of our comfort lanes and the bubbles that we tend to circulate within. And that's not easy to do. So the good intention, of course, is always there as the impetus to make the change, and then it's a long game.
Yeah. Well, I'm seeing so many good questions in the chat, in the Q&A, and I actually want to have a chance to answer them. Almost if we could just even answer them offline. We have another person who wants to come on, Revi. If you want to come on screen and ask your question, but I saw some good questions from Kim. There's somebody anonymous talking about accents and the biases around that. And also someone asking questions around the success stories related to having diverse teams. Then there was, I just want to just shout this out really quick, I'm sorry. Ultimately, would you say this is about creating more fluid hierarchies within organization? That might be it too. That's also really appealing. So much good stuff in here. But Revi, will you have a question? We can see you. Are you on mute? Or I can ask. So while we're waiting for him to join, let's use this time wisely. Ultimately, would we say this is about creating more fluid hierarchies? Todd?
I would say maybe it's about creating more fluid organization and jettisoning that notion of hierarchy. Whenever I'm at an organization, I tend to say I have a very flat conception of leadership where, and again, maybe this is because I'm biased in that things that are happening in the nonprofit world, museums are not known to be non-hierarchical places, by the way, but there are movements of workers that may be, and I mentioned the janitors, the security guards. When we were running a biennial, it was really important that to recognize they have insights. They are with our audiences more than certainly the executive director. And how do we level their insight in our organizational design so that we actually, my staff in sort of taking the inspiration from the way I pose questions, created a whole official tour through one of our, the main security guards. Now, mind you, they didn't work for us. We were borrowing that staff from the city of Chicago. So what wasn't leveling things like pay, but I think that's where the world is going to really look at, fluid organizations that glean insights from wherever they are in that organization. And I think those are huge steps that we can take towards making more inclusive workspaces.
That's really good. Well, it looks like Revi dropped off, but somebody had a really good question. And when we're talking about different types of folks, and we have 1 minute, what are your thoughts around accent biases, especially with international students or immigrants? And Todd, I hate to pick on you again, but you're also starting from ground level with a lot of folks of just, getting people into our industry. So what does that look like as far as an answer?
I think of accents. I also think of, Black English or Ebonics. There's all kinds of ways that the way that we present culturally creates reactions, and we have, I speak standard American English, whatever that means, and that can create reactions the other way. Like, if you haven't met me on a call, I had a hilarious thing this was pre-internet, but had a phone relationship for a year with someone. My name is Todd Palmer, and I showed up and he's like, oh, I was not the Todd Palmer he was expecting. So I'm not sure I have an insight about how to counter that, but just more the insight that that these things, biases, privileges, preferences, we have to combat. We have to make them conscious. Mm-hmm. I think Jenn and Christina and Marco probably have more to say about some techniques than I do.
Yeah, Marco, I know we're at the top of the hour. I did see you come off mute. Get in there.
Quickly add that I guess depending on where you're coming from, I'll say at the leadership level, if you're the person hired, you need to remind your team that I would say accents are, again, it's a culture add, but it's a great culture add, because what an accent tells me is that this person is extremely knowledgeable in their own language. And now they've learned another language and they're able to convey ideas to me in this brand new language in such a way that they're at the table, right? And so that puts them in my own mind, that puts them at a different level, because again, they're able to broaden their understanding so much that, that they're here. And so that's what I would tell my leaders. That's what I would tell my manager. That's what I would tell the people I was working with. Like, there's no way you can look down on someone with an accent, because they have to think about what they're saying before they say it in an entirely different language, and they're still saying something that's extremely valuable. There's an extra step that they're going through that we don't have to go through. And so we can appreciate that adds value. And then also they can understand others of the world from all different populations who have to go through the same thing.
Yeah, that's really good. That's a great way to wrap up our conversation today. I almost feel like this should be a part 2. There was so much to this. It's funny how you can start a conversation with only 5 to 7 questions, and it unpacks so much, especially in regards to these conversations. I want to thank all of our panelists for joining today, for sharing your thought leadership, for sharing your time. That's huge, especially because you guys are typically paid for these types of conversations. And I just want to give a big shout out to our audience for your engagement and for the questions that you guys had. There's the thank you. And all the folks who decided to come on camera. It's, I know, a vulnerable thing. I know we didn't get a chance to get to all of you, but I just appreciate all the engagement everybody had today. And I hope that we will continue to inspire the IIDA family. I say family, yes. Let's create more pathways. Let's have a more human-centric approach to diversity, equity, inclusions, and creating organizations and businesses with belonging. I guess that's a so long and stop recording.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much. This has been a
Yes,
pleasure.
indeed.
Yes, you guys tell everybody where they can get in touch with you, how they can, hire you, how they can have you speak to their organization, have a one-on-one with you. Can we put that in the chat? And can we also just—
I put something in the chat. It looks like it went to panelists only, but if you could diffuse the diversity and design address, we're doing information sessions starting next month again.
Awesome. Christina?
I'm sure I can put my information in the chat as well.
Marco, I saw yours. Jen?
I'll do the same.
Very good.
Sure.
Good for
I
me.
encourage everyone to add me on LinkedIn. I love connecting with folks. And if there's anything that I can do to support you in your career journey, and your hiring needs, whatever the case may be, feel free to reach out. And yeah, thank you for having me here. Thank you all for being here. Thank you to my fellow panelists. I learned a lot. I was taking notes. And so this was a wonderful session. And thank you, Rashanda. Yes, you do. I'll reiterate what someone else said. You deserve your own show. You have the look, you have the intelligence, you have the demeanor. We'd love to see it. I'd watch. So think about it.
Thank you. Jen and Christina, your sign off. Where can people reach you? What else are you involved in?
Sure. So I'm also a coach for Better Up. I'm a fellow coach for them, and I advocate for their organization. They are a great supplemental tool for any organization that's going through a change management, or if you just want to add an extra benefit for leaders and employees alike. You can reach me at jennifer.johnson@betterup.co. You can also reach me on LinkedIn, and I will piggyback off of you, Marco, and say that I like to connect with folks too, so please reach out.
Christina?
I am not really involved in anything other than Gensler at this point.
That's a big
It
deal.
keeps me quite active, but.
And Todd, we are going to look for your next engagement, and you're going to
Yes,
share.
and I just put the website in the everyone thing. And you can look me up on LinkedIn as well, but we have a formal system of organizing and opening up to businesses. So if you send that, there's like an intake, you'll get into our mailing list and all that stuff.
Okay, really good. We're going to share all of that on the IIDA website as well. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thanks.
Who stops the recording? Elliot, do you?
Yeah, I do. I'm just doing it right now.